Hi folks, Josh Clark here, WSA's Restoration Coordinator. In this series of webinars and videos, I will be covering how to conduct a residential site assessment. So the residential site assessment is a free service offered through WSA where certified stewards visit residents' homes and make recommendations on handling stormwater, reducing pollution, and connecting them with qualified professionals for action. Residents of the county or city will notice stormwater issues coming in their own backyards. This leads them to contacting WSA for help. And through this process, we send certified stewards to the resident's home to assess what the issues are and to offer recommendations on how to contend with them. In these presentations, we're going to cover what the residential site assessment is, what the residential site assessment's process is. We're going to cover the desk assessment part of the RSA form. We're going to be showing you videos that cover the resident interview and site assessment. We're also going to discuss some common problems that are found at residential site assessments, and then we're also going to walk through how to finish everything up and put together the resident follow-up. So there are a few things to keep in mind. Each steward is different. Everyone brings a different background to the table. Some folks have professional training. Some folks are really good with native plants. And some folks might not have a lot of experience but are excited to help. This is all good. Anyone who has gone through the Watershed Stewards Academy should have the tools to conduct an RSA. You're bringing to bear the skills and tools you have to make observations and turn them into recommendations. With the sites, stewards encounter many different kinds. As RSAs come through the WSA office, we try to vet the site and concerns to make sure that the request is appropriate for a steward. Using the desk assessment, which I will talk about shortly, as a starting point, you will start to get a feel for site conditions, at least on paper. Beyond vetting a site before the RSA is assigned, there can be questions that come out of an RSA that you will need help with. Just always remember that WSA staff is here to help. So RSAs are housed in the Residential Site Assessment Group, which is a steward action group that works closely with the WSA Restoration Coordinator to conduct the RSAs. Some stewards conduct RSAs independently from the office or from the RSA group, but we ask that those stewards follow the protocols set out in this training. So there's a few ways that RSA requests come into our office and then get distributed. Typically, county or city residents contact the office or are referred to us. From there, we collect pertinent resident and site information, such as addresses and phone numbers, and then we pass that along to the RSA group leads. The RSA group leads then log the requests and assign them to stewards. So once the request is assigned to a steward, that steward contacts the resident. We have boilerplate email verbiage on the RS or on the WSA website under the stewards only page that can serve as a template for an initial outreach. Once contact is made, stewards typically interact via email or over the phone to schedule the date of the residential site assessment, which ends up being the resident interview and the site assessment. So the RSA form is in three parts, which is the desk assessment, it's the resident interview and site assessment, and the follow-up with the resident. We're going to jump into this form in a couple seconds here. But I want to also say that some of the form is done at home via GIS or kind of sitting down before you go out on site. But really, the whole point of the form is to produce um, a detailed recommendation to the resident. It's hopefully a really easy to use step-by-step way of kind of looking at observations. Some things that you should really keep in mind is that for confidence and safety, RSAs don't need to be conducted by yourself. If you would be more comfortable going with another steward, coordinate that with the RSA group lead or the WSA office. You don't have to do this by yourself. You should really be prepared. And with that in mind, you should wear weather appropriate clothing and shoes. You should pack your RSA form that has the desk assessment filled out on it. It's a good idea to take extra copies of the RSA form. A clipboard comes in really handy in the field. GIS maps of the property are really helpful. Pencils or pens, however you want to take notes. And then a camera or a cell phone with a camera is really, really great. Another thing to consider taking are your steward business cards. It's a good handoff to give to the actual resident. And speaking of handoffs, you may also consider taking along a resident handoff packet that the RSA group has put together, which contains information about WSA, about rainscaping practices, and other pollution reducing resources. So as I said, we're going to jump into the RSA form here. So there are three parts to the RSA form. The first page of it kind of spells out what those are. It gives you some direction on how to do those steps. So the first step, as I said, was the desk assessment. And right now we're using the county WERGIS, and we're going to dive into the bones of this in another recording. But the central idea is to get an idea of what is happening at the site before you actually go out there, and to create some base maps to use for your assessment. The second part, which will be a video series that you guys will be able to watch, is conducting the resident interview and site assessment. This talks about using the site assessment sheets, which are part of the form, and your base maps to make notes and make sure that you get as much information as you can from observations of the site conditions, so that that can lead to recommendations. Another good thing, or another good resource to keep in mind, is the WSA Rainscaping Field Guide. And then there's also ways to discuss other pollution reducing behavior changes. Um, there's a lot that can happen on site, and you can see many more different opportunities than the property owner or the resident is ready to address. Um, but with some neighbors, just starting slowly with small changes will yield the best results. And really, the RSA tends to be just the point of beginning. Again, we're going to be following up with the resident as kind of step three, and we'll have a dedicated um, uh, presentation exactly as to what that is. But really, that is the summation of what you guys are kind of doing with the RSA. That's where all your suggestions live. It's all in a nice form, and we'll see that here in a second. So the first part of the form just has the basic resident information, the name, the site address, the resident's phone number, the intake date. That's a good idea just to note, so you know how old the RSA is. So whenever you get assigned an RSA, that's the date you'll put on, and then the email for the resident. It's always good to keep it in one place. So again, we're going to go over this in a next in one of the next presentations here, but this is what the desk assessment looks like. It covers some basics like the watershed and distance to streams. It talks about soils. It gets you to think about whether they have wells or septics, if they're on city water or sewer. And it also asks you to figure out the existing impervious surface of different pieces of the property. That'll give you an idea of the percent impervious of the surface, and gives you an idea of what you might be looking at. Other things to really dive into are terrain. So are you expecting to have steep slopes? Land cover, is it pretty well wooded? Does it look like it's going to be shady? Storm drain infrastructure or stormwater infrastructure. You might see on GIS that there might be existing BMPs on site, or that there's a storm drain close by. Um, and then there's other pieces of GIS that could come in handy too, depending on the site. Again, this blank form does live on the Seward only page, and we also have copies at the office if you need them. So as you're working on the desk assessment, as you're thinking through kind of the process of this again, this is probably coming after you've sent out your email with the boilerplate information. You've probably already scheduled your RSA, so really you have all of this filled out. You send out your email, you conduct the desk assessment, and then the actual resident interview and site assessment happens. So step two. As I said, we go into depth of this in the videos. So we have spaces on the form here, pretty much a full blank page here where you can take notes as you're out on site. It's also helpful to have a blank map that you can take notes on as well. But one thing that I want to signpost here is that as you listen to the resident describe their observations, it is important to remember that they are the expert of their site. And a lot of times perceptions are reality, so it's always a good idea to listen with an open mind. We have this build up for the next part here being your observations. We've tried to break it up into general site conditions that you might see: water, drainage and soil, sun, vegetation, terrain, downspouts, that sort of thing. And you'll see in this column that we actually have some contextual questions. So as you're thinking through what these pieces are, if you ask yourself these questions and then write in this section what the answers to those are, it'll be really helpful as you're kind of thinking through what recommendations you make. So again, I keep talking about your blank GIS map. That's really important. So these are, again, another series of questions that will help you think through what you should have on your map. So as you're back at your desk after you've done your actual interview and site assessment, as you're preparing the resident follow-up letter, you'll have an idea where some of these things live. And again, this all leads to making better recommendations as you go. We have listed here some, if you sees, maybe recommend these. So from leaves to pet waste to a highly maintained lawn, this gets you an idea of what a proper behavior change might be. And there are links here that you can either take verbiage from the website or even just give the resident the link, and they can be, it can be something in your letter that they can click on and follow up on themselves. We also have in the recommendation realm some pretty straightforward rainscaping practices listed here. We have their descriptions and again, some things to keep in mind if you're going to recommend those. And I just want to signpost here that there are a lot of rainscaping practices out there. And if they're not on this list, that probably means that they require more engineering or design than what you are qualified to give as a steward. So if you see an opportunity to recommend other practices, or if a resident specifically asks about them, it's a good idea to connect them with a professional. So again, as you've worked through these first couple steps of the form, you're basically putting together all of your notes, you're kind of walking through some recommendations, and that leads you to this last bit, which is the follow-up letter. I call it a letter, it can be an email. What this has here are different parts of what you can recommend or what you can kind of summate from your site visit. But I do want to point out here that it is really important and crucial that you have this verbiage on your letter. It says, please note that my suggestions below are intended to help guide you toward reducing your personal pollution. As a master watershed steward, I am not authorized to make specific plans to redirect water flow. For professional guidance on specific designs or installations, you may contact the contractors listed below. So you'll see here that it calls out that there is a list. Part of the steward handoff packet is a list of residential sized designers and installers that you can kind of draw from. We also have the vendors and contractors list on the WSA website, and it's not a bad idea to use CBLPs or Chesapeake Bay Landscape Professionals and their website CBL pro.org has a great directory that you can use. So again, the follow-up letter is broken up into parts. It's always a good idea to start with positive points that you might see. If maybe the resident is using a rain barrel or is not using a lot of chemicals in their lawn, it's always good to give them some positive points to start with. So from there, as you're looking at your notes and you're noticing that there are personal pollution situations that you can describe behavior changes to, it's a good idea to call them out here. And then if you see opportunities for rainscaping action, you can put that in there. We have a resources section here. So this could be links, it could be hard copy resources that you can say are attached, and even contractor names. If you are making a recommendation of contacting a contractor, please use a minimum of 3 names. It's really important that we don't come across as endorsing a specific person. But again, you can refer to the vendor and contractor list for ideas. You can refer to the residential size designers list. You can use the CVLPs. And then it's always a good idea as kind of the summation of the entire RSA, of the entire follow-up letter, to just give the homeowner some next steps, concrete next steps that really spells out what you're willing to do with the property owner or the resident. And it's not necessary for you to be completely involved with every step of the process, but it's a good idea just to kind of set out what you're agreeing to do and not to do. And again, I just want to signpost here that if a rain garden or other infiltration BMP is a possibility, it's always a good idea to include in your follow-up letter information on percolation tests and calling Miss Utility, as these should be done prior to siting or designing the project. So with that, um, I'm going to end this recording and we're going to shift to the next one. Thanks.